In this edition of Back in History, we take you back in time to the last days in office of President Goodluck Jonathan, who served as Nigeria's president from 2010 to 2015. In particular, we take you back to that moment when he placed a call to his opponents in the presidential election, having been briefed about the likely outcome of the election. Jonathan has written about the events of the day, and some is hereby reproduced from his book titled My Transition Hours. It is a book of 197 pages published by Ezekiel Books, Kingwood, and printed in the United States of America. Welcome to this edition of Back in History. At page 75 of the book, Jonathan has said as follows, quote, "I knew what was coming the day before I called General Muhammadu Buhari. I had reports on the polls around the country. It was clear the results were not going to favor me. Apparently, there were many instances of irregularities. There were a series of problems with card readers, resulting from widespread technical hitches, leading to the non-uniform application throughout the country. For some inexplicable reason, the electoral body, INEC, had been able to achieve near 100% distribution of permanent voters' cards in the north, including the northeast, which was under siege with the Boko Haram insurgency, but failed to record a similar level of distribution in the south, which was relatively more peaceful. Social media was filled with all manner of stories, pictures, and videos. I was settled in my mind that I was not going to be the sitting president pointing out these infractions and accusing the opposition and the very electoral body I helped to strengthen. The world saw my ordeal at the polling unit in my community in Bayelsa State, where the card reader refused my permanent voter's card even after we tried repeatedly during accreditation. And it was the same with my wife and my mother. It was a moment that exposed the shortcomings of INEC, the electoral body." Jonathan continued, still in quote, "However, I was heading towards peace. Stopping the election on voting day would have been like detonating an atomic bomb. After we managed to vote, upon filling the incident forms, I left Bayelsa for Abuja to monitor the elections and collation of results all over the country from the 29th to 31st March 2015. The country was tensed. I had to do something. I could no longer wait for the collation of the final results. The pressure on the country was palpable. In Lagos, people were ready to bust loose on the streets, and in the north, the stage was set for envisaged violence. One of my party's agents at the INEC National Collation Center in Abuja, Elder Godsdale Rubebe, eventually got into a heated argument with the INEC chairman, Professor Atahiru Jega. That further raised the tension in the country. Everyone was expecting the worst. I knew it was time to douse the tension." He continued, still in quote, "As I said earlier, I was fully informed about the manipulations, intrigues, intimidations, and betrayals. The consequences of not conceding were only better imagined. My natural instincts for peace automatically surfaced. I was going to make a decision which reflected my commitment to that ideal. This is the foundation of my essence. In my periodic projections into the future, I did not see how I would be presiding over any kind of chaos. I was prepared to promote the peace, unity, and progress of Nigeria. This is a huge sacrifice, but I hope my readers believe me when I say it turned out to be one of the easiest decisions I ever took while in office. With my mind made up, I knew it was time to inject peace into the tense polity, especially before the electoral body completed collation." He then said, still in quote, "I was in my living room with some ministers, aides, and friends. Among them were the coordinating minister for the economy / Honorable Minister of Finance, Dr. Mrs. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, Honorable Attorney General of the Federation and Minister of Justice, the Honorable Minister of Aviation, Mr. Osita Chidoka, and Waripamowe Dudafa, my senior Special Assistant on Domestic Affairs. They were recommending sundry alternatives, but I was quiet in the midst of their discussion. I hawked my thoughts, figuring out how to do that which was best for the country. My personal interest was receding rapidly and the interest of Nigeria looming large. I excused myself and left the sitting room. I walked into my study. Even here in my study, my mantra was a strong circle around me, supporting and comforting me. Let the country survive. Let democracy survive. My political ambition is not worth people being soaked in blood. Jonathan wrote further, still in quote, more reports flowed in, and I could not wait anymore. The announcement of the final result could take issues out of all our hands. It was time for me to take action and bring peace to the nation. I felt I was destined by God at that point in time to inject the peace serum and douse the palpable tension in the country. I reached for the telephone and placed the call through the State House operators at about 4:45 p.m. A peace I had never felt since my political sojourn descended on me. It showed me where I had been in the past 16 years and where I was then. I smiled at the thought of what I was about to do. I waited calmly for the person at the other end of my call to answer. That person was Muhammadu Buhari. He eventually answered and said to me, "Your Excellency," and I responded by also saying, "Your Excellency, how are you?" Buhari responded, "I am all right, Your Excellency." I then said to him, "Congratulations." He responded, "Thank you very much, Your Excellency." President Jonathan continued, still in quote, "For several seconds the line was seized by the loudest silence I have ever known. Then we had a brief discussion. I could sense his relief too. He knew what could have been. Here is a man who had contested 3 times and lost. Maybe my gesture humbled him against his expectations because he thanked me and we talked about the handing over processes. Everywhere, all over Africa, Asia, and other parts of the world, countless deaths have been recorded on the scores of elections and power disputes. I mentioned Cote d'Ivoire earlier, where people died in their thousands during post-election violence. Similar scenario had unfolded in Kenya. African nations are most prone to post-election violence than other parts of the world. Only very few African nations have not experienced post-election violence on a very grand scale or some bitter power tussle fed by tribal or ethnic sentiments. Jonathan went on, still in quote, "I hung up the phone, confident that my decision was right for Nigeria and would probably have a great impact on Africa. This may well be the beginning of a new perspective to power, a perspective which places national interest above personal preference. It should not always be about winning. After my conversation with Muhammadu Buhari, which lifted my spirit greatly, I felt better and lighter. It was time to break the news to my ministers and aides. I wandered back into the living room. These are people I came to know over a period of time. I anticipated what their response would be. In my newfound calm, I stood before them and told them what I had just done. The elections were over. I had called and congratulated Muhammadu Buhari on his victory. It was time for all of us to move on. Stunned silence greeted the room for some time, and after they overcame the shock, they all congratulated me. My aviation minister Osita Oka sought my permission to tweet my phone conversation with Muhammadu Buhari. I obliged him, and he did. The country was no longer waiting for the declaration of the election results. The nationwide tension automatically dissipated as though a red-hot piece of iron had been dipped in a bowl of water. End of quote. For President Jonathan, the phone call he made to then-candidate Muhammadu Buhari was the best decision to have been taken in the circumstance. But for his supporters and members of his political party, Jonathan gave in too quick. For them, the violence which Jonathan feared was overrated and projected out of proportion. A good number of his party men and women were not happy with him. They were disappointed, more so as President Jonathan himself was fully aware and updated about the skirmishes that trailed the election. For these party men and women, Jonathan should have held on a little till the final announcement of the election results as a mark of respect and in appreciation of their sacrifices for him. Some analysts have said that the election of 2015 was the very first time that Jonathan stood for election in his life, and these persons were thus not surprised at Jonathan's approach or handling of the D-Day, as he never had found himself in such tense situation before. There were several reactions to Jonathan's decision, but for Jonathan, the time to concede defeat was that very moment that he placed a call to Muhammadu Buhari. Jonathan did not go to the election petition tribunal. Muhammadu Buhari was sworn in as president of Nigeria, and he went on to serve for 4 years in the first instance and won election to serve for another 4 years, making it a total of 8 years. The rest, they say, is now history. Many thanks always for being a part of this channel. Do remember to subscribe to the channel or follow the page for regular notification on every new video. I remain your friend and host, Kingwood, wishing you the best of time as we continue to journey together on the mission to discover and document in contemporary digital forms the history of Africa.